Now, I've been thinking about this sermon for the past 15 weeks or so. I knew that we were going to be coming to an end to the story. And so I wanted to dive into something I felt was really, really crucial to, new Christians or even Christians who've been in the church for years. And so I'm calling this Lessons from the Lamb. And over these next few weeks or a couple months, we're going to be exploring different things that Jesus taught. We're going to be exploring some of the parables, and we're just going to be looking at Jesus' lifestyle and lessons that we can learn from him. Um, Now, today we're going to be specifically diving into the parable of the sower. But before we get too deep, I do want to discuss a little bit about what parables are. Now, in Jesus' time, a lot of things were taught in parables. In fact, much of the New Testament, well, the Gospels are filled with these parables that Jesus taught. And these are simple, short stories that have a spiritual lesson. Okay? And the reason why they were used is because they helped bridge the understanding of a common idea to a spiritual idea. You see, things like farmers, right, learned very, very well when you talked about growing things. Common occurrences at the time were like inheritances and weddings and sheep, and so learning from these things were really, really easy, and just made it a way for Jesus to connect to people on their level. Maybe some modern day examples would be like driving a car on the rumble strips, and talking about the driver needing to keep his eyes on the road. That would be something that if you tied it to a spiritual lesson could be a parable. And so when we're diving into the lesson today that Jesus taught, Jesus wanted us to understand something from the perspective of a seed. Now, the parable of the sower begins with Jesus' ministry growing and growing exponentially at the time, right? People were actively searching out to listen to him speak. You couldn't just jump on YouTube and learn a lesson from Jesus. No, you had to be there in person. And so, in fact, the crowds were getting so large that the text tells us that, as we're diving into this parable, Jesus had to get into a boat and go out into the Sea of Galilee in order for people to hear him on the beach. Now, the parable starts off that a sower went out to sow. Nothing out of the ordinary here. He's doing exactly what they would expect, right? It doesn't say the parable went or the sower went down to the supermarket. No, it says the sower went out to sow. And he introduces this sower who sowed in four different types of soils, four different types of areas. Okay. And this would have been really, really easy for people to understand in the time frame. They were agriculturally minded, and many of them probably would have survived on their own crops in order to live. And there weren't like any supermarkets at the time. There might have been farmers markets, but there certainly wasn't a Walmart around the corner that you can go to and get your lettuce or whatever you might want to eat at the time. And so we're told that the first type of soil introduced here is a path. Okay. And so this seed falls along the path, and the seed didn't even have a chance. The seed had been, or the soil had been compacted by foot traffic, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to take root without a little bit of tilling or preparation. And so it says the birds came by and they took it away. Now, it was stolen not to be used for its purpose of creating new crops, but for a different reason. Instead of producing it, it was producing a yield. It was taken up much earlier. It still had the opportunity to be food, but its opportunity to become food for many had been decreased exponentially because it was taken up by food for the bird. The second type of soil that we're introduced into is rocky soil. Now, this rocky soil is a little bit better than the soil that was or the seed that was spread along the path. But this rocky soil again didn't allow for it to get a sufficient root system. Its root system was just, it's going to be way too shallow. Nothing's going to be fully developed, and so it's going to get scorched by the sun because the water on the surface is going to be evaporated, and any of that water that is going to actually help out is going to be deeper down into the soil. And so if it didn't have a sufficient root system and the sun comes out, it's scorched. The third type of soil that we're introduced here is the thorns. Okay, soil that is amongst of the thorns. And I think it's important to understand here that this is the only type of soil that has active competition. Okay, these are two plants fighting for the same space. This is the seed from the sower and the thorns. Okay, and the thorns, they crowd out the good crop. In fact, even if something does take root, it steals its nutrients. Okay, and so thorns, because because they are um, because they're crowding out the other plants, and because they are stealing the nutrients, they're often very pervasive. Okay, they can just take over areas. They don't need as much water. They don't need as thick of a root system. They can grow in a lot of places that regular crops cannot. Now, the fourth soil that we are introduced here is the good soil. And this allows for crops to grow. There's no competition. It's able to get a deep, healthy root system, and it produces a strong crop. Okay? And more than just producing a strong crop, it allows for crops to multiply in due time, because those crops are going to be dropping seeds which are going to introduce new crops. And so the disciples, they understand this conceptually, but they don't understand it spiritually. And they say, Jesus, tell us what you want us to know. Teach us. And Jesus says, well, these are like the different types of hearts, the people understanding the word. This is the seed is the word of the kingdom. And he explained that these are the heart conditions of people responding to the gospel. When we go tell people the good news of Jesus Christ, they're going to fall into one of these four categories of soil. He says the first, he says, the seed that lands along the path, okay, is like the people who hear the gospel, but they don't understand it. You see, nothing is able to grow in their heart. And there's a few type of people that come to mind when I think of people whose soil is along the path. One of the first ones is kids, right? Um, it can be very difficult to understand the Bible if you don't have a great teacher. Or maybe even the other type of people are closed-minded atheists. Okay, they're hard-headed, and they're just like that compacted path. Okay, they're stuck in their ways, and they're convinced that Jesus is not the way. Now, the second type of soil was the rocky soil, and Jesus says this is like people who hear the gospel and understand it, but they don't let it take root in their lives. Okay, it isn't allowed to pursue growth. In fact, they don't pursue growth. Okay, and oftentimes these are the people who love what Jesus has to offer us, but have a hard time understanding when times get tough, right? Just like that sun scorching the shallow root system. When times get tough, they think God is supposed to heal that, and what they don't understand is that we've been put into a sinful world full of hurt, and God is going to restore us in due time, but that's not going to take away the pain that we deal with here on this planet. And so usually when the times get tough, they give up. And more than that, they oftentimes feel like God has given up on them. Okay, have you ever been there? I mean, I can think to multiple times in my lifetime where I just did not understand, and I was this rocky soil, and I know a lot of us have been. In fact, most of us, if not all of us, have been. The third type of soil is the thorns, and Jesus says this is like the person who hears it and they understand it, but they're overcome by worldly problems. Okay, and I think that this is where a lot of people fall into the trap. Okay, they're worried about the things of this life. Okay, these are like the weeds. Okay, um, you know they worry about all these things that take place of their relationship with God. They think that they can fill in, you know, the the cup, the spiritual cup, right, with other things, right? Money, fame, power. Okay, and oftentimes, I mean, even in the text it says here, the deceitfulness of wealth. Okay, and it's funny because we live in such a consumeristic culture nowadays. We really do. I mean, us as Americans, but even all over the world, right? Um, you know, it's about what we have, right? I have a nice car. Do I have a nice house? Do I have the next iPhone, the next best thing out there? And we get confused that um, that what we have tells us who we are. The and the last type of soil, okay, Jesus says is like the person who hears it, understands it, and it's firmly rooted, all right, from the times of tribulations, and it's able to crowd out the thorns. This is the soil that we have been looking for. This is the soil that we need to be, and we need to help other people get to being. Okay, this is the soil that produces. Okay, when crops are healthy, they produce seeds, which then plant, which produce more seeds, which plant. And in doing so, one single seed can turn into a field of crops in due time. So then we have to ask ourselves, how do we encourage being good soil? Now, no matter where you are in your walk with Christ, no matter where you are in your understanding of God, you can work on one of these areas. Okay? If you're like the person along the path, okay? Those who are hard-headed, those who can't understand. If you're hard-headed, I want you to be open-minded. Okay? I want you to give God a shot in your heart. And um, if you're just unable to understand things, I want to encourage you to ask questions. Okay, people cannot be expected to understand things that they have no background in understanding. Okay, what I mean by that is that if a person who is into quantum computing or rocket science tries to have a conversation with me using what would seem to be lingo that any quantum computist would understand, right? I would be lost. Okay, and that's not to say that I don't have the ability to understand it, but it's that I nobody has taken the time to explain to me the the small things to set a foundation for me to be able to understand what God or what needs to be said, right? And with quantum computing, right? If I don't understand the lower level, there's no way I'm going to be able to talk on a technical level. Like if you're an early believer, okay, if you're on the rocky soil, I want to encourage you to dive right in to learning more about God. Okay, I want you to fan the fire of desire for God in your heart. And lastly, if you're the worrying believer, okay, if you are amongst the thorns, okay, I want you to ask for help to remove the weeds around you. I want you to know that you don't have to do this on your own. Okay? I want you to double down on your faith. Okay? And let the heavenly gardener do the work of pulling the weeds around you. Okay? Removing these temptations, removing the worries of this world. And more weeds might pop up over time. I do want you to know that. Okay? Until you're thick and healthy, right? As with grass, right? Let's think of grass, right? Until that grass is thick and healthy, weeds are going to continue to pop up. Okay, but if you give it fertilizer and you help it out and it grows over time, it's going to be thick enough to resist those weeds over the long term. And I want you to know that if you continue to dive into your faith, right, you continue to learn more about Jesus, right, you're going to be more and more resistant over time. So don't be overcome. Don't be overcome by the weeds. Let the heavenly gardener do the work. And if you can do these things, then you will have tilled your heart to create a soil that encourages deep, meaningful root growth, which cannot be uprooted. And Jesus says that it will yield a crop yielding 100 or 60 or 30 times what was sown. You see, if you put in the time and effort, if you let God work in your heart, if you explore His Word, you will eventually produce a seed that will produce more seed, that will produce more seed, and will continue this kingdom of growing others in Jesus. Let us pray.